Scott County, providing safe, healthy, and livable communities.
Yes. Receive information on Scott County Delivers, facilities management, operational performance. And as usual, favorite director, Chris Harder, is here to kick things off. Good morning, Christine.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Thank you very much for that gracious interview. I want to welcome our staff from our facilities management group this morning. We're here to talk about how these folks work together to take care of and plan for assets that you have a huge investment in. Arguably, other than our roads and bridges, this is the biggest investment you have, and these are the people that plan for and care for that. And so their work is really important to maintaining our ability to do our work as well as costs to our taxpayers. A couple of themes that you're going to hear this morning. You're going to hear about the importance of investment in preventative maintenance and what a great position we are in to talk about that after just hearing the folks from KA talk about the success of that project. Things are new, and to keep them viable, we'll need to continue to invest and maintain them. We also have you're going to hear a little bit about the job they're doing following a long-term plan for managing these investments. And that facilities management plan, we're seeing some nice follow-through with some of the components of that plan. And so with that, we're excited to hear from this group. I'd like to ask the folks, the facilitators, to introduce themselves. I would like to ask you then on the panel to introduce yourselves. But before we do that, could we ask the four folks in the back, could you just say who you are, introduce yourselves to the commissioners? Or five people, sorry. My name's Fred, I didn't see you.
You're the guys with the screwdrivers.
Everyone but Fred, could you introduce yourself? Go ahead.
I'm Matt, I'm maintenance worker too. I'm Randy Lano, I'm master electrician.
I'm Roger Smishek, I work out at the highway shop.
Dan Schmitz, maintenance worker 3. From Little Cadence.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Carrie.
Hi, I'm Carrie Weemat, Economic Assistance Director.
Hi, I'm Jen Schwartz, Admin Services Director in Health and Human Services.
Good morning, Kate Salachuk, Environmental Services Manager.
Troy Beam, Fleet and Facilities Manager.
Brandon Roberts, Program Specialist.
Chad Weller, program specialist.
Wanda King, Program Specialist.
Dustin Kruger, Capital Project Manager. Jeremy Hussman, Master Electrician.
All right, thank you very much for being with us this morning. Carrie, you want to start us out?
Sure. Okay, so the first question I have is on page 12, and it is the snapshot or the graph titled Total Operating Costs per Square Foot. I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about what drives the cost, specifically at the HHW location, given that it's considerably higher than the others.
Sure, I think I can answer that for you. So we take the total cost operating, we divide that by the square footage. So that's how we come up with the cost per square foot. I think part of the cost for a highway, for HHW to be a little bit higher is because two reasons. One is it's a smaller square footage. So all of those costs get calculated, but it's a real small square footage as per like this building. So that drives the cost up. And then also there's a lot of extra things that get taken into consideration when you're doing anything out there. So when you're painting a wall or you're doing anything on the floors, you do anything out there maintenance-wise, it costs extra money because there's so many extra rules that go in place with what you do out there from a facility standpoint. So that kind of drives the costs up, I think. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to that.
Well, I can add a little bit. There's also some extra fire suppression issues that we have to account for because of the materials that they have in the facility. And also, of course, there's garbage. There's a lot of stuff that goes out in the garbage. So a lot of cost.
If I can just add to that one, the GCW and the Justice Center, we broke out just this last year, but they have a really low rate. Is that something ramping up, or is there what's the reason that those?
Well, we do anticipate those to go up. So partially is because they weren't operating for a full year. Okay. So that's the main reason for that. And we weren't separating the costs out in the past. So now we plan to separate all those costs out, and that's why you'll see the difference. And it will go up.
Okay. So that was one of my questions. Throughout the write-up, there are it's identified some strengths and some gaps in your current asset management software and your reporting. Do we have the sophistication to break that out by building over time on this campus?
So currently we do, but it's not as accurate as we'd like it to be. So right now we're using Cartograph. And Cartograph has a lot of limitations to what we'd like it to do. And so that's why we'd like to move forward with AssetWorks, because it's much more analytical and we can do a lot of different things that we can't do currently in Cartograph. And so that's one of the drivers of what we plan to do over this next year, is to move that forward.
Okay.
So we will be able to delineate those costs a lot better than we can today.
Okay, and is that part of the long-term plan, is to move everything over to this new system?
That's the plan, yes.
All right, then I want to ask just one more follow-up as long as we're hearing the data. And that is, the report also reflects some challenges getting staff buy-in and full participation in some of the data entry pieces. Have you talked about how that might be different as you move to a new system?
So there's a couple of things. So Cartograph currently has the ability to do it after the fact. So they can go in and say, you know, if I was working on a job or a task, I can come in after the fact and add my time in. Whereas in AssetWorks, it has to be clocked in. You're actually on the clock. And it monitors that time as you're working on that project.
Okay.
And you switch to the next project, it's automatic. So the data will be a lot clearer and more sophisticated than what we have today.
So that compliance piece is almost built into the mechanics of it all? Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could, while we're on page 12.
Yep, Commissioner Overage.
I'm just wondering about the RTF and how you arrive at the cost there, because there are RTF costs that aren't our costs, because it is a partnership. Is that all the cost of RTF or our share of the cost of the RTF?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Well, RTF, the Regional Training Facility,
Yep.
is a partnership, and, you know, we have partners paying a share of the operations there. So I'm just wondering, is that $8 basically for the square footage for 2019 and those numbers? Is that based on the total cost of the RTF or our cost of the RTF?
That's the total cost of the RTF.
Okay, but it's really not, doesn't really reflect our cost then?
Correct.
Okay, so our cost could be quite a bit lower than that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And this is the operating cost for its entirety.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So similar question to page 13. On page 14, campus utility, or utility cost per building. This measure compares the utility cost per building. Can you go into a little detail on this measure, and what are the factors that might make a difference between these buildings?
So if I understand your question, so you want to understand the difference between the costs throughout the different buildings and how we accumulate with the costs.
In the utility costs, yep. So now the HHW numbers come way down. Is there a difference because of maybe age of a building or what they're doing in a particular building that might make a difference in utility costs?
So yeah, there's a lot of variations in the costs. It has a lot to do with the weather, the AC, the heat, that kind of stuff. But also it has a lot to do with some of the lighting that we're doing. Some changing of the lighting has a significant impact on the cost of the electricity. And it all depends on the square footage as well. So I think that has a big factor. And I don't know if Wanda, she pays all the electrical bills. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Not necessarily. I mean, it's just your basic utilities, not all the other peripheral costs that come along with the footage cost. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I'm not sure how to elaborate on it.
I think one thing to note, I mean, the LEC is fairly high.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, it's a 24-hour operation. There's a lot more activity going on within that facility. Reason why we see, higher bars on that one. So,
Are there targets for this? Are there targets for utility costs per square foot in your industry?
I'm not aware of any, but I know that we are going to be looking at, over the next couple of years, we're going to be looking at trying to reduce our costs. So we're trying to get our arms around what the total true costs are for everything. And we don't have that today, but we are gonna put our arms around that and see if we can manipulate those costs as much as we can.
I did look online to try and find some status, I mean, some bars to try and meet or compare us to. It was hard to try and find something that would be comparable to buildings to ours, where they're primarily offices, but then we have public works, and we have household, and so it's hard to try and get a true gauge. I'm sure there's something out there somewhere.
Okay.
Kay would have known that.
Okay, thanks.
Just sticking along that lines, that I was struck just by the sheer amount of, we spend almost $1 million on electricity and utilities. And so where I went kind of is, the green team really works on recycling and things. Could we do some kind of campaign internally on, lights off when you're not in your office, things like that, that might make an impact, so.
Yeah, those are great points. We are trying to do some of the stuff with the LED lighting. Jeremy and Randy have done a really good job of transferring all of those lights to LED, and we've done that in these 3 buildings. It's a huge impact,
Yeah.
and so it would be a good idea to do some sort of campaign. We haven't really done that yet, but we can make a note of doing that.
I think to that question too, with the renovation projects, the new building project, there's a lot of occupancy sensors built into the new design and the new standards within the industry. So that definitely helps out, I think. If you're no activity within the room for 45 minutes, the lights will go off, that kind of thing, in case somebody forgets to flip the switch when they leave the room, that kind of thing. So.
It will be interesting over the next few years to monitor these new buildings and the costs and expenses for them. So we'll be keeping a real close eye on that.
Did we get some kind of projections or like some anticipated costs when we did the building as we looked at budgets and that kind of thing? Like, this is how much in the first 5 years you could expect to pay on utilities going forward?
I don't think we did anything, I guess, on our end to review that or analyze it. But I think everything that we heard through the design process was it's going to be up to the most current standards, the most efficiency possible as far as fixtures, everything that goes into the renovations in the new building. So I think we did what we could on our part from the design standpoint to create the most efficient buildings we can from an electrical and a mechanical side.
We did some analysis on the lighting, so there's some formulas that we used, and you could see that here as well. So we did some of that analytical stuff.
Okay, thank you.
So my next question kind of goes well with that last one. On page 14, the campus utility expenditures. Page 14, it lists some opportunities that you've tried to make the buildings more efficient and less expensive. And the measures have shown some reductions in some areas. So is the plan to continue with these practices? And do you have any additional other cost-saving ideas that you want to try out that you didn't list?
So one of the things that we were looking at was we're trying to work with the new cleaning company. It's huge expense to clean these buildings. It's nearly $500,000 a year when you start adding it up. So we'd like to look at some other opportunities to make that a little bit sharper. So we could we talked about doing some anatomic, like vacuuming, that kind of stuff, to see if there's some sort of opportunities there to reduce those costs. The labor costs, and then we've done some things that we're looking at. And like I said, we want to get our arms around the true costs. We don't have the real true costs for each of the buildings. That's why those numbers were going to change. And I think AssetWorks and that software will help us delineate that. But right now, the parts, for example, are not in the software. So we want to make sure that we get every single part and how that, because the parts cost a lot of money as well. So we want to make sure that we get our arms around those costs, and then we're going to try and figure out ways to reduce it.
So page 18 talks about work task hours and task totals, and you might have actually, Troy, you might have kind of alluded to this, but I was just curious, how do you define task open time? That's the green line that's indicated on the graph. So is it through AssetWorks, and like when you start a task, that's when it actually opens, or?
So in Cartograph, as soon as
the task is entered into the system, that's when we consider it starting. And as soon as the guys perform the work and close it, that's when it stops. So this is average within days average that they would be open, and the hours are specifically the hours that they put in on the task saying that they worked.
Oh, okay, so okay, got it. So the 6-hour average is how long it took to complete, like, the job? Okay.
And then the task open time is just from the beginning to the end, from once it was created to once it was closed and sent away.
Okay.
And there's lots of things that affect that. So if we have the parts on hand to fix it, or if we have to order parts, so that has a big effect on how long those work orders are open.
Sure.
But it's gotten a lot shorter. So do you have things that contribute to that? What's your understanding of what contributes to that? Or is it just project specific maybe?
Not necessarily project specific. We've made some changes with staffing levels. We've lost a building, we've gained a building. I took on a new position, being a program specialist. I've pulled in some of the more administrative duties in Cartograph. So I do all the little footwork before I assign it to. Trying to level out the workload as well.
So looking at some of those just workflow efficiency kinds of things. Okay, thank you. Okay.
I think that kind of leads into one of my questions. I come from the admin world, and so I was curious as the three of you went through this process, the Scott County Delivers process, what did you learn, and also did it highlight some things you want to work on in the coming years from going through this process?
Well, one, I get excited for the potential of what the promise of AssetWorks is. With Cartograph, they always tease me. With Cartograph, I say it gives you a really good idea of what we're doing, but it doesn't say exactly what we're doing and how it's getting done. So the promise of AssetWorks is that the information going in is going to be way more precise and exact. So we're going to be able to actually answer questions with maybe not even general averages, but with exact numbers. And that's really exciting. It will make the job easier and decision-making a lot more informed. So that's exciting to me.
The tickets would go into AssetWorks rather than to?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And have we purchased AssetWorks and we need to roll it out, or where are we at in that process?
So AssetWorks, we currently use AssetWorks in fleet. So we do all of our fleet preventative maintenance and repairs in there. And we share that software with several other cities and counties. And so we have a really good experience with that software, and we know its capabilities. And I've worked with both. I haven't worked much with Cartograph. I've done some, but you know, there's a lot of promise with AssetWorks and implementing that into facilities.
And right now, I'm pulling information for the cost per square foot, and that's a lot of info. Whereas down the road, hopefully we can get better numbers, more accurate numbers out of it.
So we just talked about the work tasks on page 18, and then on page 19, it talks about work requests. Can you explain the difference between the two? Is the work request only those submitted by staff, and then work tasks are ones like you also create on your own, or what is the difference between?
Sure, yeah, so requests are, as you said, the issues that departments can put in, identifying different problems that they're having or different needs that they have. Anything from air conditioning issues to wanting the boardroom set up in a certain way. All of that goes through Cartograph as a request. And then tasks is work, basically. So it's that is tracking everything that they do to get that request taken care of, is tracked on the task.
Got it. That's why that's so much higher.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Were you surprised when you saw how overwhelming the law enforcement center requests were?
Nope. No.
Okay, all right.
And I think a lot of that has to do with the plumbing. I mean, there's a big issue over there with the plumbing, and we're trying to resolve that now today. So that's a big part of it. And not only that, but it's a 24/7 operation. So they have a lot more needs than we have in these facilities.
If you look at page 20, the next graph, that pie graph, is all just LEC request breakdown, and as you can tell, almost half. It's a I think it's about 45% or something, if I remember correctly, is just plumbing. It's a big, big job taking care of all the plumbing issues we have over there with old pipes and just inmates behaving like inmates, and we're just constantly having to fix issues over there.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Wolf, Mr. Wolf.
Well, first of all, there's a systemic problem with the plumbing itself. So some of the pipes, we're looking at replacing a lot of those pipes. And Dustin can probably speak more articulately than I can about it, but the pipes are in pretty rough shape, and so we're looking at getting all those replaced.
Wow.
And then it's just the cost of doing business in a jail. They're clogging toilets all the time. It's just constant. They probably do, I want to say 4 to 5 clogs a day, where they have to deal with those kind of things. Some of them are intentional, some of them are accidental. So.
Who knew you couldn't flush an apple?
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I think from the piping side of it, as a project, we're working through that right now. We did some sample testing, cut out some sections of piping, and we are having a third party actually test that piping, because what we're seeing is a lot of corrosive material within some of the piping. So whether it goes back to when the building was built and the materials used, they're trying to find that out. And in order for us to execute on a project and be confident that we know we're actually resolving and fixing the issue, they're doing some testing on it so that we know exactly what areas to go at and replace, so that we don't have the leaking pipes, those types of things, because of the corrosiveness that we're seeing. So that's kind of where we're at right now, and we're going through that testing phase right now, and we'll eventually. Right, exactly. So it's going to be a huge undertaking to replace that piping, and it's going to be very impactful to operations over there. So it's taking a very close look at it and how we phase that and go through, because they're going to be shutdown periods, which they don't shut down. So we need to kind of do a lot of pre-work and tie in the new piping and that kind of thing.
So a lot of that corrosion gets into the pipes, it gets into the shower heads, into the sink faucets, it gets into all of that, and so it clogs them up, and so we end up replacing a lot of that stuff, and that is, like you said, it's very expensive hardware, so it's not cheap to maintain. So,
Mr. Chairman, this will come back as part of the CIP discussion. These operating costs are a direct impact of a capital issue we have, and it will impact the capital improvement program.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, Mr. Chair, on the piping, I know that the jail cells were brought in on a semi, and they were pre-made somewhere else, obviously. My understanding is the piping runs behind those. Is there a walkway behind those? Does that make it in some ways easier to get to the pipes than it would have been otherwise, or not? So.
Yeah, I think it creates. Yeah, Chad's probably got more input on it, but it's definitely more accessible due to the fact that we have installed it that way. So all the piping is behind the cells, and all those connections, they have a walkway behind there where they can access and do the work that they need to.
Matt would probably argue with you, that's not so easy.
Mr. Beer.
I just want to clarify, were you asking for that to be our next tour?
No, I was just curious. I how we built the jail. It seemed like a great way when we launched off in that, and I just want to know if in that regard to the plumbing, if it's helpful. Yeah. So.
I'm looking at Leslie and smiling, and you never know, it might be a good one.
I wasn't thinking tour. I thought test it out.
Wait a minute, you were going to throw someone in a cell with an apple?
Yeah, for a week.
Chris, take control of the meeting again.
Excellent advice. Okay, so a couple things before we leave this building piece. Right, everyone was aware that the building shut down. Virtually all of our staff went home. There were a handful of people that still worked in these buildings through the pandemic. And I think people tried to figure out on the front end of that, will that cost us less money if nobody's here, will it cost the same? Will it cost more? Now we're looking probably long-term, right, at a hybrid workforce. And what does that mean as you think about what it's going to cost us to maintain buildings?
So in my mind, I think there'll be a significant change. I mean, a minimum change. But in my mind, it's cost this much to operate these buildings. You still have to have the lights, you still have to have the heat, you still have the electricity, you still have to have all the plumbing, you do all of that. So, but there will be some costs reducing in electricity maybe, especially particularly with what Dustin mentioned with the lighting coming on and off. But I don't see a significant, huge difference in the cost
Okay.
to maintain.
I would hopefully assume that less people would mean less requests, less issues being identified, and then that would mean the maintenance staff is performing work that otherwise they might. More PM time, more preventative maintenance. But then that could look the other way though, and maybe not eyes on everything like we would if this full staff isn't on board. So I think it could affect how we spend our time. Maybe not the money, but definitely how we work. How we push the guys out.
Okay, all right, thanks. All right, people on the facilitators have questions about the staff surveys because that's brand new data, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on some of that.
I was just going to ask more generally, you guys obviously just conducted the staff survey. Were there any surprises in the results?
I don't know that there were any surprises. I think a lot of it we predicted. I don't know if you guys feel that way, if anybody does in the survey itself. I think some of the highest issues that we saw coming back, the negative stuff, we got a lot of comments on the parking. We got a lot of comments on the centralizing of the garbage. So a lot of that came back. Some of that stuff came back a little bit negative, but on a very small scale. And so, I think most of that is because they just don't understand why we made those decisions. So maybe we could have done a better job of communicating that out, of why we made those decisions. But I think for the most part, those are the two most significant.
Definitely.
Yep. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
And the issue about parking was that staff didn't feel we had enough parking. It wasn't how it was plowed or shoveled or anything. It was the number of spaces.
It was a lot of, most of the comments, the general consensus of the comments were, of the negative comments, which there wasn't a lot, but the ones that we did have were more concerned about if you're not here before 8 o'clock, there is no parking. That's kind of what I saw the most when reading through them all.
All right.
Some people don't want to walk.
And I think that's probably the bigger part of it. So one of the things that we did, I think, and I wasn't here during this time, but there was an arrangement that was made with the city of Shakopee that when we built this building, we added this additional building that, the employees were not going to park on the street. And I think that's the biggest hit that we took. They want to park on the street. They want to park at whatever door they want to come into. And we eliminated those just to the 3 entrances, the public entrances. And so I think that was most of the negative comments. And it was people that were used to parking on the east side, then walking in that back entrance and coming up the stairs. And we eliminated that just because we don't want to encourage people to park on those spots because we made a commitment. Mm-hmm. We want to stick to that commitment. But there is ample parking, at least today there is.
Yeah, there's also a lot of concern about that we're at, potential like a half workforce coming to work. And if more people start coming back, and they're already seeing issues with parking, once everybody's back or more people are back, how is that going to affect the parking even then? That was a concern as well.
So is there discussions on a solution there, or is there really enough parking? It's just a little further out. Is that?
And it seems what I've been hearing is that there is parking. You just might have to park farther than you want to.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I mean, when we did the new building project, to Troy's point, we did work with the city. That was one of the commitments, not parking on the street. But we also had a third-party consultant do that traffic/parking study, and we had a requirement from the city to provide X amount of spots to align with the number of staff that would be moving to the main campus here, with the workforce center, people coming over. So that was all taken into account, and there's, based on those numbers, there was adequate number of parking spots for staff and public.
All right, so just not maybe as convenient.
Right.
Okay, all right. Other questions?
I have one, but it's.
That's okay.
It's off. Okay. So I had said about, it says that they might be looking into
Some strategic planning out at the Public Works campus in RTF. Has that begun, or is that something that will come in future years?
So right now, so on the RTF, we've hired a consultant to go out and they're in the process of doing an analysis of that building. And also, so they're going to look at the structure of the building. They're also looking at the business practices of that building. It just started, and so we anticipate that the results of that might be back end of September, probably, something like that. So we might have some resolution to that. And then from there, we don't know where we'll go. It depends on what comes out of that survey. And then on the Public Works facility, there's a lot of people. The HHW wants to expand. The sheriff's office wants to expand their storage facility out there. There's a lot of people that are looking at that space. And so we want to do a complete study. We're not going to hire a consultant to do it, but we're going to do it internally with Brad and myself and Dustin. We're looking at that space to determine what everybody's needs are. And so we're going to be doing some of that analysis. The tower, for example, the location of that tower is critical because it's in the prime real estate area right now. So it's taking up the space where if we wanted to expand, we can't because of where that tower is located. So there's a potential that we could look at maybe moving that tower to a different site. We don't know. We're just looking at different options. So we're going to get everybody together and start interviewing people and find out what their needs are. There's no promises, obviously, but we're going to do plan for the future. So what that means exactly today, I don't know, but I know that we're definitely looking at it.
What are the? No, go ahead. What are the things as you look into the next year? So like in my introduction, I said that a lot of your work helps to keep down the cost of government, right? You keep down the costs for us running these buildings and taking care of the grounds. And as you look into the next year or 2 years, what are those things that catch your attention? Like what are you watching as potential worry going forward?
I have concerns about the cost of GCW. I don't know because we haven't experienced it, so I need to understand that and what that's going to mean. So all the additional cameras and all the additional security, the card readers, all that. And so we're trying to get our arms around all that. That's kind of what I was talking about. We want to get our arms around all these costs, and then we're going to start looking at ways where we can reduce those costs. But right now, I think our biggest concern is this campus and making sure that we're monitoring this closely. The LEC is huge. As you can see, that's 50% of what we do. So we are looking at that, and we have to make the right investments to get that stuff fixed and repaired so we can maintain it better. And then the Public Works facilities are probably the next biggest thing on our target. It's the only building that hasn't been really. We spent a lot of investments out there, and so we want to make sure that we're continuing to look at that. So I think over the next few years, implementing AssetWorks is huge. And then, looking at the planning. So AssetWorks is also going to help us plan out these buildings and plan out the cost of these buildings. So we're hoping to get that analytical data to make good decisions. That's going to be huge for us.
Okay.
My question was pretty similar, actually, just looking at this past year. I work with Dustin and Troy a lot of times, and you guys work fantastic together. So sometimes I don't know, is this a new building issue or is this something that Troy would handle? But it kind of, as you've added this building and all these changes, what have been the biggest challenges, and has it raised, kind of to your question, things that, okay, now that the dust is settling, where do we go next?
Yeah, I mean,
there's not a question in there, but
right. Yeah, but like you said, I mean, we've melded very well, I guess, from the capital project side to the maintenance side. Everybody that we work with, all the maintenance guys, Wanda, Brandon, Chad, I think we've all kind of molded together now. and anything that pops up, it's just, you know, this goes this direction or this direction, and, you know, we get the tools that we need put in place to take care of whatever it is. So I think it's worked out really well, and I think we've kind of settled on, you know, how that all plays out when we do have requests for things to be fixed. So.
And we do, I mean, this is a fantastic team of people, and they do a really good job. They're dedicated and committed to what they do, and they take pride in their work. And I think that is showing, and so I think we're starting to make that change a little bit. I think having a new building is exciting, so people are excited about that, just as the employees are, so are the staff that are taking care of it. So it makes a big difference in attitude and performance. It helps.
Well, and your staff survey ratings are really positive. I mean, the parking issue aside, which isn't so much your issue even, but the results of that survey were really pretty positive. So you should be feeling good about that. Is there any last thing that you would like the commissioners to know about your work that we haven't asked you about yet?
Anybody? How about you guys? Anything? It's your chance.
I've been living in this so much for the last few months that it seems like this is everything, but I'm sure there's a lot. But it's all down to numbers in my head right now, so.
I'm excited for the next couple of years to see how things go. We're excited to see, what changes we can make and the impacts we have. So I think that's probably something that we all feel.
All right, thank you. Let's take 2 minutes. Are there any audience questions or questions from the board, Mr. Chair?
I have just a couple of clarifying questions, but let me look to my colleagues first. Mr. Brecky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, no questions, just a comment. I think this is really important because a lot of facilities, a lot of work, and I think it's easy to come in here every day, use the facilities, go home, and not think about all that you guys all do to keep this place running, to keep it in good shape. And so just thank you. I wanted to say that. And I've really been impressed with the cleanliness and everything of the buildings during this project. It's been great. And staff, you're always there right away to change up rooms and do things. So I really appreciate you and all you do, and know that it's a big job and we got a lot going on here. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Brecky. Further questions or comments? I have Commissioner Beer.
So one question I want to start off with, utilities is a huge amount of money, right? My question is, are we, the savings in water we're finding from the water savers, is that offsetting our workers' comp from all of our lost fingers from the very sharp, is that, have a little levity?
I can check off one of the questions I was going to ask.
Gotta have a little levity.
Bring out their fingers and just check.
The bandages next to the paper towels is helpful.
Yeah,
so
that would be great.
The real questions. Okay, the real questions. It sounded like early on, and so this clarification, benchmarking, like how do we rate to other facilities? It didn't seem like there was a lot of that, and I don't know, is that because with the new building, or was that sort of the same, we didn't have a lot of benchmarking when it was just this beautiful Sarajevo building? Is one question.
So we don't have a lot of experience with other buildings and working with other facilities. At least I haven't. But I do anticipate, because of the fact that we're implementing AssetWorks, and I keep bringing this up because it's a big thing for us, and we have all these other cities and counties that use AssetWorks, and we're hoping that we'll get some similarities to what they're doing. And we're a member of the, I think it's called the Minnesota Counties, I can't remember the title of the group, but we just joined here about 6 months ago. And there's a lot of communication going back and forth, so I hope to get some information from them and be more actively involved in that.
Well, I know benchmarking it's an indicator, right? It's not the holy grail, but it's an indicator. So I was just curious, like, if a lot of our departments have peers in Dakota or Carver, or and I know it's not always one-to-one, but benchmarking you can at least get some averages. And so I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you for that.
The other question I had is also sort of a personal one. These LED bulbs, they're going to save the world. They last a lifetime, and it's like a fraction of a penny a year. GCW is all LED, right? And then did I hear that we're kind of, because we didn't do all the lighting downstairs in this building when we did the modifications, but are those all LED?
So we took that on ourselves.
Okay.
Within the maintenance crew here.
To at
We
least
have
get,
been changing, so this building is all changed over. now.
okay,
The construction part did theirs, and
Yep.
then we took on the rest.
nice. So,
And then we're moving on through other buildings too.
well, I just would love to see, like, does that really save money? Like they, you know, like I said, it's personal because I've switched all to LED too, because I'm like, and my MVAC commissioner, you know, my bill goes right to his house, but apparently, and it's still the same amount for the most part. So I'm just curious. I'd love to see how
It's
that
probably
data.
pretty minimal at home. but
Yeah,
in a
right,
building
right.
like this,
Exactly. So would
Right.
you really be able to see that here? So I'm anxious to see
Well,
that data.
I can speak a little bit to that, and I think Wanda can too. We've seen a decrease in the costs just in the buildings that we've done. So, and he has a chart and a graph that he's been using, and I think it's even in here, about how the formulas that he's using to come up with those calculations. So I'm pretty, what's that? Oh, there it is. I didn't know what page it was on.
Could you take a moment, can you take a moment to explain this chart? Because I'm sitting here trying to read this. I'm not sure if we're looking at kilowatts or dollars and cents or what the deal is. Can you give us a moment?
So we're looking at kilowatts used, which is how your bill comes out, how much you use,
Okay.
and that calculates your bill. So we're just looking at the bulb, what we used before, how much kilowatts it used, compared to now that we're going to LED.
Same amount of lighting, lumens, just
Correct, yep.
dark blue is now the kilowatts being consumed to light this thing. Lower level. Okay, and this is actually 3 different buildings we're looking at.
Yep, and those are the ones that we have done so far.
Okay.
We'll keep moving forward too.
So the cost savings is on those buildings per year. And of course, once we establish a new benchmark down here in 2022, the savings next year probably will be a very small number, I'm sure.
Right, we'll save on maintenance also. throughout
Maintenance would be the
this,
big
yes.
thing. Is that reflected in this chart or is this just
It's
kilowatts?
not, this is just the kilowatts used.
Gotcha. Okay, Commissioner Berry, you wrapped up? Commissioner Wolf?
I just would say that's just on the light bulbs. If there's other things like air conditioners.
Correct.
there's a little bit of
Yep.
So, but, you know, vacuums, those things all, the light bulbs, I don't think were the biggest part, because we did the 10% decrease.
Yeah. So
Commissioner Ulrich?
I'm just curious about this. In past years, maybe quite a years past, we hired a company. The companies would pledge to analyze your operations and your costs and your utility cost and your for heat, light, whatever, and they would pledge X amount of savings, and then they would also give you options. If you did this, you'd save this much, and the payback period would be, you know, X number of years and stuff. Do you remember that when we used to have done that in the past, or was that so long ago?
I've heard about it. I wasn't part of it, but I wasn't here at that time, so I'm not really sure. I did look at some of the stuff and we've talked about it, but I really can't, I haven't experienced it, so.
Green.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Ulrich, back when Kevin, if you remember, was the CFO and we were looking at that, we did enter into an agreement. I'd have to go back and think of the name of the company. Several years into it, though, we discontinued that and withdrew from the program as we weren't quite seeing the benefits that we had thought. I can go back and pull that data, but we were part of a program that was pretty widely distributed throughout many of the counties in the state of Minnesota.
Yeah, I remember Johnson Controls out of Waseca made that a business line to lower cost and share the savings. And for a while there, when we were still trying to make the curlicue bulbs work, that was a big deal. They actually had a successful business model. And oh, by the way, we're not doing curlicue bulbs, Artie. It's all LED, right? Good deal. Hey, on this page 20, thank you for explaining the graph so that even I could understand it. I appreciate it. 15, I'm sorry, page 15. But one thing that caught my eye was the cost of electricity. About 11 cents a kilowatt hour at Spuck, which is about the going retail rate. But holy cow, how is XL doing 3.4 out at the highway barn? And if that's the case, can we run a very large extension cord over this building? What do you think?
I think, you know, so we're converting that building over as well right now. So I think we're in the
Converting.
process of doing that. The Public Works, is that what
Converting
you're
it to, No, well, I'm asking how Spuck is doing 11 cents for this building, but do we have a special rate with Excel to do 3.4?
That can't be the correct number.
Or that, there must be a mistake here.
That 0.034.
That's almost the power at the bus bar at the power plant, the cost. It's in the little box that
Yeah,
says about.
I see that. I'm just trying to figure out what it means. I never caught that.
It's got to be a different
It
number.
must be an error.
Yeah. Because as last I recall, Excel was slightly higher than Spuck. I think we have a Spuck liaison sitting in the audience. Can you nod your head one way or the other?
I don't know.
Okay, Spuck is less than Excel. We must have dropped the one there, I would assume. So-
Yeah, probably.
All right, thanks. In my last question, I think this will be the concluding comment, unless we want to pedal in place here, because we have a 10:30 public hearing, and we're not there yet, so. Workforce Center, we closed the Workforce Center, sold it, demolished it. Those folks, those positions and workstations have been absorbed into this new building. Are we going to see any economies of scale? Are they measurable? Is it, putting a few more people into a building that we already have a fixed cost to operate, does that necessarily drive up the cost of operation? Probably for coffee filters and toilet paper maybe, but what else would we be anticipating? I'm kind of looking at Troy, but does anybody else want to comment?
So part of it, when we made that decision, Commissioner, go back to the decision on the charter, it was mileage and staff time and going back and forth, and a lot of that between the Public Works facilities and the Workforce Development Center. Those staff that need to be here mainly are now located here, and so we don't have some of those travel and time costs that got lost doing some of that as well. That was one of the big driving factors, besides the teamwork and the breaking down of some of those silos that we were hoping to see from a workforce standpoint.
So there's other tangible benefits other than just a little more toilet paper, a little more electricity, something like that.
Plus, my memory of the Workforce Center, it was a fairly high-cost building to operate as well.
Very.
And that's coming out of your figures here that you've had to account for when you presented this, but going forward, hopefully it'll be a little less intense, because that one won't be on your plan of work. Any other questions or comments? Brandon?
Sir, I actually thought of an answer to your question of something I would want everybody to know is the amount of work that Wanda has to put in for security for the buildings is extreme, and it takes up the majority of her workday and even after hours. And I think it's important that everybody kind of appreciates how much work she has to put in every day to make sure the buildings are safe and the doors are working and everybody's cards are working. Dealing with a changeover to a system and working with IT is never easy. And she's I didn't mean that as a diss or something. But she's a rock star, and I just want to make sure everybody really sees how much she puts in for everything, but security especially.
Right.
Yeah.
That was kind, and we didn't talk about security, so that was nice. That was a good add. Thank you.
We have 24 minutes to talk about it if you'd like to. No, we won't be dragging that out if you don't need to. Well, thank you for your presentation to us and for bringing this group in, the folks who labor to keep the place looking sharp and functional for us. We appreciate your work. Thank you for the good job you do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.